She had found it in the shower, alone and purring mischievously. It had been 2 weeks since she'd lost her mind, and here it was, sitting there with a look about it as if it had never left. The past 2 weeks had been strange for Cleo. Her mind often wandered uncontrollably. She'd be having a conversation with somebody important, a director or a producer, and out of the corner of her eye, there it would be, just merrily bobbing past. It always came back. When she was in private, she'd scold it. It often responded with whimpers and quiet growls, but it always came back. This time, though, it had seemed to have disappeared completely. She looked everywhere for it, called for it with desperate whistles, but to her frustration had no response. Her agent had pitched her all those years ago as Cleo Burgundy, more than just a pretty face, and she really was. But while she watched the other mindless actresses have their 10 minutes of fame and dry out, have breakdowns and shave their heads, she remained strong. She knew the business, but now, without her mind, she was nothing. It was an inconvenience to Cleo, an embarrassment, and being embarrassed in front of others just would not do. Days before her mind had left her, she'd begun to notice something she didn't like in her face. Her skin seemed haggard somehow, as if it were drying up before her eyes. Of course, she had smashed her bathroom mirror, the object that had dared to tell her such an ugly truth. She had then punished the other mirrors in the house, punched them violently, until the dull thud as her tiny fist made impact became a sickening squelching noise, until the skin wore away and her knuckles began to bleed. She punched and tore at the wall where the mirrors once were, her nails scraping at the plaster. Shards of cruel glass covered the floor. She had left them there as a reminder of her power, her wrath. And now, with her mind gone and her looks fading too, who was she? Cleo Burgundy, mindless and less than attractive. She could see the headlines now, the crude rings they draw around her in trashy magazines, pointing out her flaws. She would have to fake it until her mind came back to her, and then have her assistant Emily sort out an appointment with Dr. Roberts to have some Botox, a procedure she'd been hoping to avoid. Emily Gulek. What a pain in the arse she'd become. More of a lapdog than anything, and Cleo always hated dogs, their neediness and their smell. Yes, that is what Emily had become, a dog, and what a ridiculous name the last girl had, Gulek. Recently, she'd been calling round to Cleo's house, phoning her at home, always asking if she needed anything, and Cleo had begun to loathe the young girl. For a moment, as Cleo began to list the reasons she despised Emily, she thought she could feel her mind returning to her. She quickly decided she needed a sense of self. Her anger and her impatience had always been true to her. She made a list of all the things she despised. Emily, people who talk on the phone at cash machines, directors who have no clue, people who don't let her get her own way. Humiliation, people who eat soup, not winning an Oscar. Cleo listened intently as her annoyance grew, and her palms began to sweat coldly. Anger was always such an honest emotion. She listened for a purr, a whimper, nothing, just the throbbing of absolute silence. The doorbell sounded from the quiet, making her jump. Flushed, she put on a fresh coat of blood-red lipstick, ruffled her hair, and went to face whoever it was that had disturbed her. Play it cool, Cleo. Act like everything's normal. Perhaps it was her mind waiting for her on the doorstep. How are things? A fake smile beamed at her. Fuck off, Emily. Good, darling, Cleo called, and stepped forward to kiss her gracefully on the cheek, leaving a smudge of her lipstick as a signature. She hoped Emily would be grateful for that. May I come in? I love your lipstick. Of course you do. It's Clinique and completely out of your price range. Now you savour that smudge in your dainty little cheek, darling, because it's the closest you'll ever get to affording it. Emily had begun complimenting Cleo before asking to come in, such an irritating trait. It was humiliating to beg. Cleo thought about the fragments of shattered mirrors that lined the carpet and decided immediately not to let Emily in. She did not want anything to seem abnormal. It would be so obvious that her mind had left her. Emily, darling, would be sure to go running to the tabloids with that little gem. Now's not really a good time, Emily. I'm just looking over a script, Cleo smiled dismissively. The smile didn't waver as Emily's face crumpled. She half expected her to start whining and pawing her lap. This little lapdog needed some training. Please, I just want to make sure you're okay. You haven't been returning my calls. What on earth has happened to your hand? Emily quickly reached out and grabbed Cleo's hand in an attempt to examine her wounded knuckles. Horrified that this pest should touch her in such a way without her consent, and fearful that it should discover she'd so carelessly lost her mind, Cleo snatched her hand back and slapped Emily, hard. Her hand made a delightful cracking noise as it hit her skin. Who do you think you are that you have the right to touch me, little girl? No one touches me without my permission. Cleo screamed in the young girl's horrified face. Emily raised her hand to her cheek, but Cleo tore it away and pulled it towards her, so close that their noses almost touched. She had to be sure that Emily heard her. that she'd learn her lesson. I'm Cleo fucking Burgundy, for fuck's sake, she hissed, spittle showering Emily's face. I'm a living fucking legend. I'm more than a pretty face, you know. I can be a bitch. Don't ever test me again. You will respect me, you'll stop hounding me, and you'll only come when I call you. Now run, little girl, and don't come back until I ask you to. Cleo watched through cold eyes as Emily turned and actually ran away. She may not have her mind, but she still had something. People still listened to her. That night was the night that Cleo had found her mind in the shower. Perhaps that was all she needed to know that she could cope without it. She had tried to make it rejoin her, come back to her, but instead it just purred at her. She had scolded it, but continued to purr. Cleo's rage grew at its insolence. She was about to tear into it, claw at it like she had the mirrors. She heard an odd noise coming from outside. She registered it as a sound of sobbing, of weakness. Curious, she marched quickly to the door, flinging it open in the hope of finding Emily begging outside, disobeying her orders. She needed to take her anger out on someone, or something, and she was hesitant for the subject to be her own mind. To her dismay, there was no one outside, no sobbing Emily waiting for forgiveness, just a note that had been jammed clumsily into her letterbox. She could not take out her anger on paper, it would be futile. Destroying something as weak as paper is not a conquest. Cleo unfolded the note and began to read. Mother, it began in shaky handwriting. I've tried so many times to see you, and I know that times are hard for you recently, but I love you, and I want to be here for you. Since I'm unable to see you face to face, I've decided to write my feelings in a letter. It's clear you've forgotten who you are, and it's important you know in order to get better. Dr. Roberts said you must be reminded, you must keep trying to remember. I don't know who Cleo Burgundy is, but she's not you. You're my mum, and I love you. Your name is Brandy Gulek, and I need you to try and remember this. You've had a series of strokes, and your brain's been affected by them. Dr. Roberts said the strokes have led to a condition called agnosia, which means you don't recognise there's anything wrong with you. I know this is confusing right now, but you're my mum. You are kind, you are gentle, and you have always looked after me, and you have never, ever hit me before. It breaks my heart to do this, and I know it may be selfish, but I can't see you until you're you again. You're not my mum anymore, you're a stranger. Please, please call me as soon as you read this, if you want me in your life, and you're willing to remember. I love you so much, Emily. Emily? It was from Emily. Cleo stared at the note for a moment before setting it down on the table. She applied a new coat of lipstick and thought to herself. It was all so clear now. Emily's neediness, her pleading to see her. Cleo felt sad for a minute as she realised that part of her, which she couldn't understand, would miss her. Emily had gone insane and she had to be fired.